While the 1960s had questionable diet fads, the era's focus on scratch cooking and smaller portions offers surprising lessons for modern health that many still overlook. Think tuna casserole bubbling in the oven, beef stew simmering all day, or chicken and dumplings after church. Before we begin, hit like and subscribe. Today, we revisit 10 cheat meals from the 1960s that kept everyone skinny. Picture a Friday evening in the 1960s when Catholic families gathered around the dinner table after a long week. On the menu sat a bubbling tuna casserole pulled fresh from the oven. Its scent filled the modest kitchen egg noodles, mingling with the faint sea salt aroma of canned tuna and the earthy comfort of mushroom soup. A sprinkle of peas added bright green specks that promised both color and nourishment. What made this dish memorable wasn't extravagance, but simplicity. A single can of tuna, some noodles, and a can of soup came together to feed a family of 4 for less than $1. The texture was balanced: soft noodles, tender peas, and a golden crust of breadcrumbs or crushed potato chips that crackled under the fork. One serving was modest, about 1.5 cups, yet it satisfied without leaving anyone sluggish. The casserole became routine, almost ritual, repeated weekly in countless households. Campbell's even printed the recipe right on their soup cans, so millions of families were cooking the very same meal on the very same night. Looking back, it was less about calories and more about rhythm, community, and the comfort of eating the same familiar dish together week after week. Imagine a heavy pot simmering all Sunday afternoon on the back burner, its lid rattling softly, while rich aromas filled every corner of a 1960s home. Inside was beef stew, the kind that turned inexpensive cuts of chuck into tender bites after hours of slow cooking. Potatoes, carrots, and onions melted into the broth, creating a hearty flavor that was more about vegetables than meat. The portions reflected both frugality and balance. A pound of beef could stretch to feed 6, with each ladle heavy on vegetables and light on meat. The broth was skimmed of fat, leaving behind a clear, savory base that warmed without greasiness. Served with one slice of dense homemade bread to soak up the last drops, it was a meal that filled you up and kept you steady until morning. What made this dish unforgettable was how it aged. Families often made a large pot on Sunday, and by Wednesday, the stew tasted even better, the flavors deepening with every reheat. It wasn't just food, it was a tradition of patience, portion control, and savoring each bite slowly at the table. If you're enjoying this trip, hit like and subscribe for more. Sunday afternoons in the 1960s often meant a pot of chicken and dumplings gently bubbling away after church. One whole chicken bought for just a handful of coins was stretched to feed a family of 8. The bird was boiled until tender, releasing its essence into a golden broth. Thin strips of dumplings, more like noodles than heavy dough balls, were dropped in, soaking up every bit of flavor. The result was light yet deeply satisfying. Each bowl carried a small piece of chicken, a ladle of broth, and a few dumplings that swelled in your stomach, making you feel full without excess. The broth shimmered with richness from the skin and bones, but it was never greasy. Adults often sipped it slowly, while kids raced to get the dumplings first, slurping happily before running back outside to play. Meals like this weren't about indulgence, but resourcefulness. Nothing was wasted. The bones, the vegetables, even the cooking liquid became part of the dish. It was a kind of quiet genius born out of necessity, creating energy for the afternoon without ever leading to heaviness. Thinking back to these first 3 meals, tuna, casserole, beef stew, and chicken, with dumplings, which one would you have loved most at your family's table? In the kitchens of the 1960s, few smells were as comforting as a pot of navy bean soup simmering low and steady through the day. A simple bag of dried beans, soaked overnight, transformed into something magical after hours of gentle cooking. The addition of a leftover ham bone saved from Sunday's dinner infused the pot with a smoky depth that felt far richer than its humble cost. Every spoonful carried creamy beans that had broken down just enough to feel velvety, balanced by the subtle saltiness of the ham. Families often paired it with a small square of cornbread, dense, gritty, and only lightly sweetened. It wasn't dessert, it was fuel made to soak up the last drops of bean broth. The beauty of this dish lay in its staying power. A bowl held perhaps 200 calories, yet it filled stomachs for hours. Resistant starch in the beans worked quietly to keep hunger away long before science explained why it worked. By the 3rd day of reheating, the soup grew thicker, almost like a paste, and somehow tasted even better. This was food that carried families through both lean times and busy weeks, stretching pennies while nourishing everyone at the table. Picture a weekday evening in the 1960s, the smell of meatloaf drifting from the oven while children set the table and parents returned from work. Meatloaf back then wasn't the oversized, greasy slab many of us imagine today. It was a frugal masterpiece. 1 pound of ground beef stretched with breadcrumbs, eggs, and finely chopped vegetables so that 6 hungry people could eat well. The texture was moist yet firm, with a sweet, tangy glaze of ketchup caramelizing on top. Alongside came mashed potatoes, simple and starchy, made with just a splash of milk and maybe a pat of butter for the entire batch. Each person got a neat scoop, enough to complement but never overwhelm the plate. Together, the loaf and potatoes offered balance, protein, starch, and flavor that lingered long after the meal ended. What made Meatloaf special was its second act. Cold slices, tucked between 2 pieces of white bread with mustard, became the next day's lunch, fueling kids at school and adults on the job. It was practical, filling, and a reminder of how nothing went to waste. The ritual of eating it warm at dinner and again cold the next day tied families to a rhythm of comfort and continuity. On chilly evenings in the 1960s, a pot of homemade vegetable soup often became the centerpiece of dinner. Housewives would gather odds and ends from the week: potatoes, carrots, cabbage, onions, turning what looked like scraps into something warm and filling. The base wasn't store-bought stock, but water saved from boiling vegetables earlier in the week, poured back into the pot to create a broth rich with hidden flavor. The soup itself was light, mostly water and fiber, yet astonishingly satisfying. A bowl might only hold about 100 calories, but it filled the stomach completely, leaving no room for snacking. Families ate it slowly, spoon by spoon, savoring the variety of textures: cabbage still with a little bite, carrots sweetened by long cooking, potatoes soft and earthy. Crackers or a small piece of cheese might accompany the bowl, just enough to round out the meal. What made vegetable soup unforgettable was its variety. Monday's version might lean on cabbage, Thursdays on root vegetables, but the rhythm remained the same: cheap, nourishing, and shared at the table without distraction. It was proof that simplicity could satisfy again and again. If you're enjoying this trip, hit like and subscribe for more. In the 1960s, baked chicken with rice was a kind of meal that felt both comforting and practical. A single whole chicken cut into pieces was placed on a rack to bake so the fat dripped away, leaving tender meat with crisp skin. Each family member got just one piece, perhaps a drumstick for the kids, a breast or thigh for the adults, no more, no less. The rice beneath told its own story. Cooked in the diluted drippings, it absorbed every drop of flavor, transforming plain grains into something rich without extra butter or cream. A small mound of rice alongside a piece of chicken and a side of green beans or carrots made the plate feel abundant, even though the portions were modest. What stands out is the ritual of eating chicken on the bone. It forced people to slow down, working carefully to separate tender bites, savoring the meal instead of rushing through it. And nothing went to waste. The leftover carcass became soup, the extra rice turned into pudding, and the cycle of resourcefulness continued. It was a meal that embodied balance: enough protein to satisfy, enough starch to energize, and just enough restraint to keep families trim without ever feeling deprived. Long before it became a decadent main course, macaroni and cheese in the 1960s was a humble side dish, usually baked in a well-worn casserole dish that families brought out week after week. Elbow macaroni was cooked just until tender, then folded into a simple white sauce of milk flour and a touch of sharp cheddar. With only a small handful of cheese stretched across the whole dish, flavor came not from excess but from balance. Baked until golden on top, the breadcrumbs added a crunchy contrast to the creamy pasta beneath. Portions were small, half a cup at most, served alongside a modest piece of ham or even a couple of hot dogs, always with a vegetable on the plate. The combination felt indulgent, yet it never tipped into overindulgence. What made it special was its place in the rhythm of the week. For many Catholic families, it was Friday food when meat wasn't allowed. The dish offered comfort, warmth, and satisfaction without weighing anyone down. Kids fought for the crispy edges, adults appreciated the tang of the cheddar, and together it reminded everyone that even the simplest ingredients handled with care could feel like a feast. In the kitchens of the 1960s, stuffed bell peppers stood tall in baking dishes, each one a perfectly measured portion. The peppers themselves became little serving bowls filled with a mixture of ground beef, cooked rice, breadcrumbs, and onions. As they baked, the juices mingled, turning the rice tender and the filling savory without needing extra cheese or heavy sauces. The beauty was in the built-in moderation. One pepper was one dinner. For teenage boys or hard-working fathers, maybe two. But for most, a single pepper eaten slowly with a fork and knife was enough to satisfy. The slight bitterness of the pepper paired with the rich, meaty filling created a balance of flavors that felt hearty but not heavy. Families appreciated how this dish stretched ingredients while sneaking in extra vegetables. Nothing was wasted, and everyone's plate looked equal. No endless refills, no towering piles of food. It was both practical and quietly elegant. Looking back at baked chicken with rice, macaroni and cheese, and stuffed peppers, Which of these three would you be most excited to see waiting at your family's table? Sunday dinners in the 1960s often centered around a pot roast, slowly braising in the oven, filling the house with an aroma that promised comfort. A 3-pound roast seared first for flavor was nestled in a pot with potatoes, carrots, and onions, then left to transform over hours into something tender enough to fall apart at the touch of a fork. What made this dish remarkable wasn't the meat itself, but the balance. Plates were filled 3/4 with vegetables, only 1/4 with beef. The gravy was simply the reduced cooking liquid, deeply flavored, but light poured sparingly over everything. Each bite carried the essence of meat without overwhelming, so a small portion felt like plenty. Pot roast wasn't rushed. Families lingered over the meal, talking and laughing, giving the body time to feel satisfied. Seconds were possible, but by the time the plate came around again, most realized they didn't need more. It was food that nourished body and spirit without excess, a ritual that kept waistlines trim while binding families together. Your comments keep these memories alive. Drop yours below. And if you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, hit like and subscribe for more. As we leave the kitchens of the 1960s behind, it's clear those simple meals carried more than just flavor. They carried lessons about balance, patience, and family connection. Our grandparents weren't counting calories yet. Their scratch cooking and smaller portions shaped a healthier rhythm of life. Maybe the old ways weren't perfect, but they held a kind of wisdom worth remembering. Your comments keep these memories alive. Share which dish reminded you of your family table. And if you enjoyed this nostalgic journey, hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the next trip back in time. Until then, here's to honoring the flavors and traditions that fed both body and soul.